Hey, it's Soul with another video. Today we're going to cover the short quotes and phrases that have helped define the World of Warcraft culture since the beginning of time. WoW. This is kind of a personal list because some of these quotes may connect with me more than they might with others. Maybe if I get a flood of people calling out what I missed, I'll do a part 2 or a part 3 or however many I need. But I think I got a good bit of it here. So without further ado, let's go. And we'll start with everything that came out of BARRENS chat. This doesn't exactly refer to chat that takes place in the Barrens, although that's literally where the phrase comes from. It more closely refers to the less than savory kinds of conversations that came out of it. The Barrens used to be WoW's largest zone, occupying a large part of WoW's population through the earlier leveling process. It's because of the long exposure inside that zone where seemingly random chats created a legacy of their own, including the fate of Mancrick's wife, Chuck Norris, and anal jokes. Then there's sour fan jokes, and well, hey, what was that? Did somebody say? Anyway, the days of Barrens chat have long ended with the opening of so many new expansions and zones. This sort of talk is now contained within the bustle of trade chat and all major hubs. The Ice Stone has melted. This is an in-game warning from the Frost Lord Ahun encounter during the Midsummer Seasonal event, indicating the boss is vulnerable to attack. Specifically, there was a bug in 2009 where this callout appeared for random players at random times, regardless of where they were. What's even stranger is that this bug occurred during the Love is in the Air event, which is in February. The Midsummer event takes place around June and July. Since this wasn't a very intrusive bug though, it was mostly made fun of, and in Warlords of Draenor, a toy was introduced in dedication to the bug.
I will not move when flame wreath is cast or the rain blows up.
Karazhan was one of the early raids in the Burning Crusade expansion, and arguably the most accessible one given the shorter attunement quest chain and requiring only 10 players to run. The accessibility made it both famous and infamous, and this was one reason why it was the latter. Flame Wreath is a powerful spell used by the Shade of Iran in the Karazhan raid. Players who are afflicted by it are instructed to not move, otherwise the Flame Wreath will detonate, almost surely causing a wipe. Unfortunately, this happened more often than not. In the Legion release of the Return to Karazhan, this ability is no less deadly than it was before.
I, Gammon, will save us.
Said by what was once one of the most pitied NPCs in WoW, Gammon was a low-level NPC who was tortured by fans enough to catch Blizzard's attention. He rose in prominence, gaining levels and taking up small roles as a quest giver, rescuable NPC, achievement, and now has a toy dedicated to his bravery. Hearing his declaration in-game is a sign that a player used the toy to turn into the now infamous character. Basic campfire for War Chief. During the time leading up to the Cataclysm, when it was known that Garrosh Hellscream would suddenly become War Chief of the Horde, a number of players were outraged by this outsider threatening to lead them. This set off a chain of complaints, including a campaign to vote other NPCs to the role of War Chief, including Vol'jin, Saurfang, Eitrig, and a basic campfire. Thanks to Garrosh's antics and the role of War Chief being tossed around like a hot potato, this campaign persists.
Have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
No. And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
This is J. Allen Brack, the executive producer and, as of 2014, senior vice president of the World of Warcraft. At BlizzCon 2013, an attendee asked a question at the Warcraft Q&A, a panel reserved for fans and critics to speak directly to the Blizzard team. The question asked was regarding the likelihood of bringing legacy realms, or realms that ran previous versions of the World of Warcraft. Brack came off as a bit curt with his response, continuing with a few examples of how gameplay would be received, never mind its implementation or viability. Regardless, this quote and the tone of the producer's answer has been memed to spark anger throughout the legacy community, and remind those players of Blizzard's alleged disconnect from its fans.
I remember you. In the mountains.
This was said by Thorim in Ulduar, one of WoW's most beloved raids from one of WoW's most beloved expansions, Wrath of the Lich King. It's a little funny because of just how it doesn't come off very naturally, which is what I'd say about a lot of in-game speech. Somehow this got picked up and was a much repeated phrase in forums. and has even been a part of a contest entry in BlizzCon 2009.
But wait, you. I remember you. In the mountains.
Citizens of Dalaran, raise your eyes to the skies and observe.
It's a quote said by the mage Ronin, after defeating Algalon the Observer and turning in a quest. This RP scene was a rare occurrence during the Ulduar raid tier, but this became a lot more frequent and more obnoxious after players were able to more easily access and defeat the secret boss. It wouldn't be until 2014 when a fix was implemented, limiting the radius where players could hear this audio.
Oh, it's a lot better than we usually do.
Alright, chums up.
Ready, guys?
Let's do this. Leroy Jenkins!
Oh my god, he just ran in.
This doesn't need an introduction, but I'd be a jerk if I didn't. This was said by player Ben Schulz in a video uploaded in 2005. It became a sensation and a nerd's celebration of World of Warcraft's casual approach to MMORPGs. This character eventually became an in-game NPC in Warlords of Draenor, an achievement, a trading card, Hearthstone card, and was occasionally mentioned in mainstream audiences.
At least I have chicken.
Seriously, I don't think we've actually mentioned it so far in this Q&A, but this is, I believe, the largest content patch that we've ever put out for World of Warcraft.
As far as I know, that is true.
This is typically looked back on as an ironic statement, and frequently used by critics to turn Blizzard's words against them. For example, 7.2 might have had a lot of content complete with quests and mounts and cosmetics and other features. A lot of that was split between the classes and specs and factions. One player might have had a ton to do for their 12 alts. Others with only one character they cared about had very little. Blizzard's teams have tried to keep cautious about using this phrase, but sometimes they can't help themselves, I guess. #Savage. This was the campaign phrase used to define the Warlords of Draenor expansion, but other phrases sought to dethrone it, including, and I quote, "that piece of crap Facebook expansion," or "Warlords of Paymore," or "you think you do but you don't," that sort of thing. It didn't help that this phrase was also used in-game, notably used by Thrall, which sort of made it even worse for some listeners. Nomi sucks. So that specific phrase didn't pick up, but I say it all the time, referring to the infamous Legion NPC that would randomly burn the food that we would hand over, and occasionally give us something good in return. If there was anything Nomi consistently produced though, it was memes to celebrate players' dislike of his services. Blizzard opted to join in on the fun, introducing Nomi as an attackable NPC during a Legion PTR. Bring the player, not the class. This is one of the mottos closely associated with Wrath of the Lich King. It's a design process that influenced WoW's direction for many expansions. This approach was a response to the perception that at a high raid level, stacking classes who gave certain buffs was more beneficial than to bring a different class, even if that meant favoring a player with less skill who just so happened to run a needed class. The execution resulted in the sharing of raid buffs among classes, including but not limited to stat and health increases, enemy debuffs, and mana generation. The advancement continues to this day, with the current approach of foregoing most raid buffs and debuffs altogether, in favor of powerful cooldowns that again are shared among several classes.
What's your game?
This was the end hook for most of the World of Warcraft commercials. They'd typically start off with a personal testimony from a celebrity actor who identified themselves with a World of Warcraft character. And it would end with,
What's your game?
I'm Mr. T, and this is my night elf mohawk.
This came from one of the most memorable of the World of Warcraft commercials, starring Mr. T. Unlike most of the other commercials, Mr. T identified his class as a Night Elf Mohawk. It went as far as a Night Elf Mohawk NPC appearing in-game in 2009, who passed out temporary Mohawk grenades. Guess what the grenades did?
Don't look so smug. I know what you're thinking. But Tempest Keep was merely a setback.
This was said by Kael'thas Sunstrider in Magister's Terrace, or at least what was left of him. He was defeated during the Burning Crusade expansion in Tempest Keep. Yet he somehow came back thanks to one of his cronies and very little effort at further context. This quote has been used time and time again whenever old enemies make a return seemingly out of nowhere. Notable figures include Onyxia and Nefarian, Illidan, Archimonde, Kil'jaeden, and likely more.
I don't see enough dots! More dots now!
Similar to Leroy Jenkins, this quote is one of many in a video full of memorable quotations to be repeated again and again by players, even celebrated by Blizzard with an achievement. The owner of this angelic voice belongs to Dives, whose antics live on out there in YouTube land.
Oh god, I'm gonna have diarrhea again. You can't go to the bathroom, you're stacking Sunder armor. It's okay. Mom, bathroom!
This South Park episode aired October 24th, 2006, before nervous Warcraft players hoping their beloved game wouldn't get roasted to oblivion. Instead, they were delighted with an episode of memorable quotes like this one, and the episode itself left viewers only slightly scathed, with its satire of the typical MMO gamer.
You are not prepared!
This is Illidan's signature line, first said in the opening cinematic for the Burning Crusade, and then it was said again at the end of the cinematic. It became very synonymous with Illidan and the World of Warcraft overall, and Blizzard of course picked up on that, bringing this phase back a number of times since then, and especially during World of Warcraft Legion. Class Fantasy. It's the phrase that's been thrown around by the World of Warcraft team, not unlike the push to bring the player, not the class. Class Fantasy is Blizzard's approach to redesigning abilities to make them more in line with the classes and specs they're assigned to. For example, a Paladin's signature abilities include Divine Shield and Crusader Strike, but spec-specific abilities include Avenger Shield for the Protection spec and Holy Shock for the Holy spec. This approach is being used to differentiate the classes and specs to give them a more unique feel. It's also a phrase thrown around among fans in the conversation of ability pruning. Green Jesus. This is the more sardonic moniker for Thrall, the titular star of the World of Warcraft. The phrase itself took root with Thrall's involvement in the story, most notably during the Cataclysm expansion. His sudden elevation within the Earthen Ring to his temporary assignment as Earth Warder and the sort of savior of the world left players to wonder if this was more like a projection by Chris Metzen, former senior vice president of Blizzard and the voiceover for Thrall. To this day, any instance where Thrall so much as shows up is met with groans from fans critical of the writing behind the famous orc.
An illusion? What are you hiding?
It's one of several phrases that help define Suramar City, a location in the Broken Isles during the Legion expansion. Much of the zone's activities take place in the city, requiring players to sneak around in the skies. Being too close to certain NPCs within the city prompted this warning before discovery, and has since likely caused a number of incidents of post-traumatic stress.
Me gonna hook you in the duker!
It's one of the more questionable but less forgettable phrases in the World of Warcraft, said during the Mists of Pandaria expansion. It's got a few obvious adult overtones without being overtly sexual. Nonetheless, many players do use it in the most sexual tone. Jaina is a Dreadlord. This is one of the most prevailing conspiracy theories in the World of Warcraft based on multiple sightings throughout its history, surrounding one of its most famous characters, Jaina Proudmoore. This includes her drastic change in character since the bombing of Theramore just before the Mists of Pandaria launch, her behavior during that expansion, her absence in World of Warcraft Legion, and other events. Blizzard acknowledged this with a few non-serious Easter eggs, including referring to Jaina as a Dreadlord in the Warcraft Chronicles Volume 2 Index, and most recently her reintroduction into the Heroes of the Storm game with a Dreadlord skin. Blizzard has said on record multiple times that she is not in fact a Dreadlord, but they also didn't specify when she wasn't a Dreadlord, or to specifically say that she never was and never will be a Dreadlord in any scenario.
You face Jaraxxus, Eladar Lord of the Burning Legion!
This is one of the more overblown lines in an already overblown declaration from Lord Jaraxxus, Eladar Lord of the Burning Legion. He makes his entrance and exit in the Trial of the Crusader raid after being summoned by Wilfred Fizzlebang. The strength of his entrance made an impression on players, even inspiring a mixtape.
You face Jaraxxus! You face Jaraxxus! Eladar Lord of the Burning! What difference is there between you and the Lich King now?
Isn't it obvious, War Chief? I serve the Horde.
Watch your clever mouth, bitch!
This was said by Garrosh Hellscream to the very clever Sylvanas Windrunner in the Cataclysm expansion. This is the first time, and as far as I've seen, the only time in WoW where the word was used in any context, let alone the most offensive kind. Cursing isn't uncommon in video games overall, but hearing this came as a surprise to players when it was first heard, underlying the personality of Garrosh as one who's volatile and discriminatory, as we'd later learn over the years.
Thralls! Balls! They're everywhere! Ah!
Okay, this was said by Legionnaire Nazgrim in the Cataclysm expansion during the events of the Vashir Zone. Some players such as myself were, well, we were surprised to hear something like that. Thrall's balls alludes to similar exclamations and colloquialisms that mean little more than something to just shock people. Like, holy jackrabbits, Batman! By Odin's beard.
Thrall's balls! I'm sick of fighting Naga!
Orc players can say this catchphrase too by using the /woe command. This was added in the Legion expansion.
Harkenite Reaper! Ho!
I couldn't decide on a line to use, so I went with this to cover some, but not nearly all of the early machinima created during the World of Warcraft's earlier days. From the talent of Nim to the antics of illegal Danish, there's more to cover there without doing a separate video, so maybe I'll do that sometime.
I crushed an apple fruit vendor. This will not be the last.
This phrase is said numerous times by Crow Threadstrong, a rival vendor in Shatrath's lower city. There's no audio, but it served as an entertaining distraction for players who happened to be passing near the distressed shopkeeper.
Does this fruit vendor not value his life? You are running out of time, fruit vendor.
Seems like a fun guy. Hunter Weapon. Before hunters were limited to using only polearms or ranged weapons, they were able to equip almost any weapon, from two-handed axes to dual-wielding one-handed swords and fist weapons. And this was on top of also equipping a bow, gun, or crossbow. It was a long-running joke for a hunter to stake a claim on any weapon that they were able to wear. The laughter stopped when they were serious.
Run away, little girl! Run away!
This is the default sound for running the heck away from bad things according to Deadly Boss Mods, arguably the most popular WoW add-on in the world. Its origins come from the Red Riding Hood encounter in Karazhan. The boss, the big bad wolf, fixates on a player and inflicts heavy melee damage while taunting them with this famous callout. So that was just about everything I could find, but if you have other ideas on what words or phrases or sayings define the World of Warcraft, share them in a comment below and I'll throw together a part 2 or more. If you like this video, like it and share it, and I encourage you to support the channel the best way you know how. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.